If people trickle in, that is also totally okay. They'll be able to join while we go through announcements. My name is Helia. I'm the Vice President of Sci-Chi, and I'm actually going to be hosting a general meeting today to give our wonderful President, Jenna, some time off from the announcements. Make sure you all sign in your activity points because, as we all know, activity points are very good for your membership status and things like that. But that is not what we're here to talk about. So today's general meeting topic, we are going to be going over a non-weird research faculty panel. But before that, we do have some Sci-Chi announcements. There we go. So first off, for upcoming events, we do have a lot of things happening this week. For both week 7, we have our office hours on Wednesdays from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Those are on Zoom, so feel free to swing by, say hi to one of our officers. If you have any questions that are Sci-Chi related or anything you want to talk about, then you're welcome to drop by and say hello. We also have our grad school personal statements workshop happening tomorrow, February 8th at 6 p.m. And we'll be talking more about that in a bit. And we also have our Psychology Winter Camp, our life panel application closing tomorrow. So if that's something you're interested in, also stay tuned. We do have some more elaboration coming. And lastly, our officer application also closes this Friday. So yes, more information will be coming in the following slides, but keep an eye out for that if that's something that you're interested in. Also next week, we do have our Psychology Winter Camp event. If you're a volunteer, I'm really looking forward to seeing y'all there and for having a fun weekend for our high schoolers that are attending. And as it says at the bottom, we do have our 4th general meeting on Tuesday, February 22nd, and those will be elections. So as I mentioned, tomorrow we have our grad school personal statement workshop. We have our wonderful speaker, Chanel Nettle, who has a PhD in the School of Psychology, and she's going to be talking to us all about the tips and tricks to keep in mind if you're going to be writing a personal statement for graduate school. Whether or not you're going to graduate school, though, I bet you'll be able to use a lot of this advice on medical school applications, any other personal statement that you might be needing. So feel free to swing by and hear a lot about what she has to say. Really helpful for anybody that attends, and hopefully we'll see you there. And next up, we do have some announcements about Psychology Winter Camp. I believe Brandon, our program director, is going to be talking a bit more about that.
All right, thank you, Helia. So hi, I'm Brandon, program coordinator for Sci-Chi. And so first off, I want to say that our Psychology Winter Camp t-shirt fundraiser is still going on. That will be going on until February 24th, which I believe is the Thursday of week 8. So great way of supporting Sci-Chi. It's $19, which also includes the price of tax. And you'd be Venmoing that to James at James Z privately. And you would be including your full name, our mail, and mention that to the PWC fundraiser and your t-shirt size. This would be worth 2 activity points as well. Next up, we're still looking for a panelist for our life panel for PWC. So if this is something that you're interested in, speaking on a panel about your experience in college so far and like letting the high schoolers know what opportunities there are for them, this is great experience for you to put onto your resume / CV. And it would also help potential psychology majors / college students know what to expect more in college. So on the application, you just kind of indicate what kind of extracurricular activities you've been a part of. We have 3 to 4 open spaces, and it would be worth 1 activity point. The deadline has been extended until tomorrow, Tuesday, February 8th at 11:59 p.m. And I'll be sure to drop the link to that if you're interested. And I believe it will also be sent out in the recap email tomorrow. Great. Also, our site will be happening next quarter. So that means that we're starting to look for our committee heads. If you are familiar with our site from last year, our site is our annual psychology undergraduate research conference where students in psychology or neuroscience labs have the opportunity to present their research. Undergraduate researchers will be presenting posters or oral presentations about their research. And this year we're looking to hold it in person, but that's the plan so far. So we're looking for a recruitment committee head, review committee head, and an advertising committee head. Once again, these opportunities look great on a resume/CV, and it really gives you the chance to demonstrate strong leadership skills. More information will be on the application itself, which I will also be dropping into the chat. This is also a great way to earn activity point because you'll be earning 5 activity points, and these will be applied for the spring quarter. The deadline, you still have about 2 weeks to go. It's February 18th, Friday, 5 p.m. And yeah, that's all for me. Thank you, Helia.
Awesome, thanks, Brandon. I think this is a really good leadership position if anyone is considering it. I myself was the head for the review committee, and it was a super wonderful time working with the rest of the team. If you're considering running for Sci-Chi board in the future, or if you're not ready for a board position yet, as Brandon said, this is a great way to develop those leadership skills. And you can even apply it to something outside of Sci-Chi if you decide to take on elsewhere. But speaking of board, we do have our elections coming up. So we will be doing our voting for elections at our next general meeting, which, as I mentioned, is going to be week 8 of Tuesday, or Tuesday of week 8. And if you're considering running, now is the time. I highly recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the board. We have a lot of different positions that are open in Sci-Chi. We have our officer application. So we have all of our board positions, president, VP, secretary, historian, treasurer, co-DEOs, all of that on our officer application, which is closing this Friday. So please feel free to check out the guidelines and the different responsibilities if that's something you'd like to be involved in. Or if maybe you're interested in a chapter leader position as maybe one of the mentor program facilitators or one of the FLIMP coordinators, then that application will be closing Friday, February 25th, and the guidelines are here as well. So again, if that's something that you're interested in, highly, highly recommend. It's a wonderful experience to be working with other board members. And again, I'm not just saying that because I'm on the board. But if you do have any questions, feel free to email us at UCR Sci-Chi, or you can ask in our elections category we created on Discord, or come to office hours. It's always great to ask people who have been in those positions, who know those experiences, versus kind of just being confused and then not running in the long run. So we're always here to help. And so feel free to drop by if that's something that you're considering. Awesome. So those are all of our Sci-Chi announcements. I know all y'all are here for our wonderful non-weird faculty research panel, and our secretary, Paris, is going to be running our panel. So Paris, I'll pass it off to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our non-weird research panel, and thank you to our wonderful faculty panelists for coming. We're so excited to hear you guys talk. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to kind of introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your research. But first, I want to go ahead and define what is weird, because I'm sure some of you might be going, what are you talking about? What is non-weird research? So WEIRD is an acronym for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. So it's generally referring to kind of something that we see in a lot of research, especially in psychology. Most of the research that is done is conducted on participants and sample groups that come from countries that have these 5 traits. So it's usually Western countries, educated, industrialized, et cetera, et cetera. So that means there's not really a lot of research that's done in countries that don't fit that criteria and with, participants who aren't from, those sorts of sample groups. So our panel today is actually made up of researchers who have done non-weird research. So if we can get you guys to go ahead and introduce yourselves, go right ahead.
All right, well, thanks, Paris. And thank you for inviting me today to come and speak to all of you. I'm really looking forward to some fun conversations. So I guess, right now I should introduce myself, and pretty much the slide sets everything about myself. And so I'm Cecilia, and I think I actually taught quite a number of you because I was scrolling down the list, and I think I recognized quite a lot of names. So, so I guess in addition to what's on the slide, I would add that I've conducted research, obviously in the United States, but also in China, Japan, more recently in Finland, as well as in Mexico. So if you're interested in finding out more about how to conduct research in some of these countries, I'd be more than happy to, share what I know. So yeah, that's pretty much it about me.
Awesome, thank you. And then for our next panelist.
Okay, that's me. Let's see, that's all accurate that's on the slide there. I've done a project that kind of grew out of a small idea, which was I was interested in assessing people's experience of the situations of their lives. And we developed an instrument called the situational Q sort, in which people pick a moment of yesterday or some other time, usually yesterday, that they remember, and they describe the experience. So was there an authority figure present? Was there music present? Was there conflict? Was family present? Was it noisy? Was it stressful? Was it enjoyable? And there's 90 such items. So what you do is you don't rate each one yes, no, you rate each one of them relative to each other and to how important they are as descriptors of that situation. So for example, if an authority figure was present, but it wasn't very important, you could rate that down. So what we get is a holistic description of the experience. And somewhere we got the idea in our lab, talking among myself and our graduate students, that maybe we could try that around the world. And it kind of grew from that. We did a smaller project and then a much larger one. Maybe you can put the next slide, Paris, if you're running the slides. And we ended up having collaborators in all of these countries. So we did the data collection by the internet, but we didn't just throw it out on the internet. We actually had researchers, psychology professors in each of the countries that are in blue on that map. This started with a few people that I happen to know that I met from meetings, and the word kind of spread. And we had people then approaching us saying, can I join? And the answer was always yes. So it ended up exploding way beyond my fondest dreams, actually, into 58 countries. There's actually 64 countries. I'm not, maybe 58 countries in the data that was being presented that day. There's 64 countries, 42 languages, and the number of participants now, this is an old slide I'm realizing, is over 17,000. So the translations were done by our local collaborators, and it is handy for us Americans doing international research that English really is international language, that our collaborators who are all PhDs themselves pretty much all understood English and of course their own language. So they were the ideal person to do the translations for us. So we ended up having not only descriptions of situational experience, but we also did personality inventories and all sorts of things around the world, these different countries. It's diverse in the sense that it's from all of these different countries, including several countries in Africa. And I say that is even up to date because Uganda doesn't show on there, but we had Senegal, Uganda, and Kenya and South Africa and Jordan actually as African countries. We had collaborators in each of these countries recruit the participants from their local campuses. So in the one sense, it's from lots of different countries. On the other hand, it is college students for the most part. And that's something I guess I could talk about at length, but I guess I'll stop there to just give you an idea of the kind of data we have and the different places in the world that it's from.
All right, thank you, Dr. Funder, for sharing all of that. And next up, our final panelist.
That's me. Hi, everyone. My name is Aegan Kim. I am an assistant professor in the school psychology program in SOE, and very nice to meet you all. As the slide says, my research focused on universal mental health screening and really focusing on identifying resilience and risk factors of students. And I've been doing some collaborations with some international scholars, especially those from South Korea and also from Spain. We've been writing some book chapters together and also some journal articles. So we wanted to identify some resilience and risk factors that are more specific to the culture, and how those resilience and risk factors influence their school-based performance or school well-being, or their life satisfaction, or their school belongingness, so that we can identify and promote those factors more specific to children in the specific culture. Another line of research that I do and very interested in is looking at some publication characteristics and the publication outlets of international school psychologists and researchers in school psychology. It's basically looking at, we've been working with different international scholars and trying to find out within the universities in their country, are they more encouraged to publish their work in international journals or in more Western journals, or domestic, more the journals in their own language. And depending on that, in terms of what types of studies they do, what types of methodologies they use, they can also be influenced by their publication outlets, because if they are more encouraged, or for their promotion or tenure evaluation, if they are more encouraged to publish their work in international journals, then there is limited diversity on a lot of journals' editorial board. So considering that in terms of editors or the reviewers' understanding of those cultural specific factors and how to conduct the studies within that culture, their understanding may be limited. So depending on which publication outlet they choose, the type of studies, research they could do can be also limited too. So, those are some of the studies that I've been doing with international scholars. I'm looking forward to talking more about them. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you guys for all introducing yourselves, and I'm excited hearing about your research. So this is going to be kind of a Q&A panel. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and either our speakers will see them or I'll read them out loud. But just to kind of get the ball rolling, I know you guys have talked about a little bit about the general research you've done, as well as, your non-weird research. So I was wondering if you guys kind of wanted to get started on how you specifically chose to get involved with non-weird research, and what value and importance you find in conducting that research in comparison to research in the United States or other weird countries. And if you guys want to hop in, go ahead.
Okay, I'll hop in. I'm reasonably high on extroversion, so you'll need to mute me probably at some point. A long time ago, I discovered there was something called the European Association of Personality Psychology. And I joined it thinking, if I join this association, there's got to be a trip to Europe in there somewhere for me. And some years went by, and I went to my first meeting, which was in Poland, and it was really a lot of fun. And I met a lot of people from around the world. The European Association of Personality Psychology, unlike the American societies that are similar, really draws much more internationally, even outside of Europe. So there were a lot of Asian psychologists there in particular, and even Middle Eastern. And so I started just meeting some people, and that was, I think, became the seed of an idea to see what we could do across international borders. And as the internet became more and more ubiquitous, I mean, when I first started in this field, there was no internet, if you can imagine. And then it became something that only rich people had. And now it's really something you can do cross-cultural research. And even in so-called underdeveloped areas of the world, a lot of people have internet access, and one way or another can provide data that way. So it became much more practical to start doing projects internationally. And when I first started doing the situational experience study, I told people I had two possible hypotheses. Situational experience around the world is different, or maybe it's the same. But either way, I wanted to know. So I really did start off with that much of a simplistic hypothesis, or lack thereof. And it's been a really rewarding experience. The data has been fascinating. We've gotten some really interesting papers out of it. And really the best part for me has been the personal interactions with the collaborators around the world. I haven't really met very many of the students around the world, sadly, but I have met a lot of the collaborators. Just before the world ended 2 years ago, there was an international meeting in Hanoi, where about a dozen of our collaborators were there, including our Vietnamese collaborator, of course. So, and that's just been just wonderful, because one of the things that I've discovered, and I think this is true of science in general, but certainly I found it true in psychology, is when I start talking to psychologists from around the world, it was a little bit like years ago, I went to Denmark and met my Danish relatives that I'd never met before. And you know, and then I discovered that once I was there, the fact that I was American and they were Danish meant nothing. We were family. And the same thing has happened in psychology, that the fact that some of them are from, some of our collaborators are from Russia. We actually have some from China and from Hong Kong and from Taiwan. We have Israel and Jordan and Palestine. None of that matters when we start talking about psychology with each other. We're all psychologists. We're all trying to solve the same problems together. And I've sometimes thought our project is the way to world peace. If we could just all talk about the things, the interests that we share, the things that are different about us maybe could drop away a little bit. So I'd say that's been my favorite part so far, has been being able to meet and work with these collaborators from different countries. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear, David, your kind of, how you got there, in terms of, starting the international collaborations. And I would say my interest in cross-cultural research pretty much has a similar kind of origination point. So I was curious in the question of both finding cultural variations as well as understanding what's so-called universal. So what's really common across, everybody, no matter where you are. But then also trying to see if, actually there might be, certain very nuanced practices or style of thinking or, little things that we might not expect that could be different across cultures. So kind of like, if I were to give this very academic reason as to why I started to become interested in cross-cultural research, is because of this idea of finding out what's universal and what's culturally specific. But then I guess I also have a more personal reason that I can share with you about why I wanted to conduct these types of research, is that I love traveling. I'm someone who likes to, go to different places and get inspired by talking to people, by finding out how people do things and how people just, on a day-to-day basis, how they interact with one another. And I can, when I travel, I can basically sit in a mall and just watch people do stuff, and which, sounds weird, but that's what I sometimes do. So that's kind of like a more personal reason. I thought like by going into the field of cross-cultural psychology, I would get, plenty of opportunities, just, traveling to different places, meeting with people, talking about psychology, talking about things that, we're all interested in. As it turns out, after so many years, I learned that actually, the traveling part isn't always feasible, not only due to the pandemic, but also, as researchers, sometimes you just get collaborators collect data for you or with you, but not so much you yourself or me, myself, going to these fun places. But that's a side, thing that, isn't too important. But, I do want to share both kind of, a more academic reason as well as my own personal reason for getting into this type of work.
Thank you both for going first. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm the extreme introvert, so I usually take the last spot. But so the reason why I got interested in more international research and scholarship was because I was born and grew up in South Korea, and I went to college there, and then I actually moved to this country after college. So a lot of the things that I experienced growing up in South Korea and lots of things that I've been learning here in terms of the school practice or, the education and the system and things like that. I've noticed so much differences between these two cultures and countries. and just wanted to really understand, because in not every study, but in many studies, sometimes I see that the innovations or mental health approaches that were developed based on the values and cultures here are often just transferred to other countries, and we test if that's actually effective with that population. And if it's effective, then we say that's good, then we can just use this intervention. But there might be better, more optimal ways to support students in that culture. But sometimes I feel like a lot of times, because a lot of, especially in school psychology, the field, we don't really have many programs or scholars in school psychology in South Korea yet. So in terms of the research that they do and the programs they use in schools, I felt like a lot of them are based on more Western cultures. So that was the reason why I kind of got interested in doing this research, because I've noticed those differences in cultures, but in terms of how we approach mental health are very similar. Another thing that I'm really interested in is identifying ways to recruit and support international graduate students in school psychology better. So as an international student, that I've noticed it's my own challenges as an international student. So especially in the field that I had very limited knowledge in this field, about this field, because we don't really have a very big I guess, the field in South Korea yet. The school psychology is not a very popular field yet. So just learning about the field and the different education system, all the terms and this, and then also going through graduate school as an international student had some other aspects that I had to go through. So just, finding ways for the programs to better support those students, so that we can have more diverse school psychologists in this country. That's something that I'm really interested in, and that's why I started conducting research in this area too.
Thank you guys all for sharing. So I have another follow-up question, and I know Dr. Funder, you touched on this a little bit about how difficult is it to conduct, but also to fund cross-cultural research. I know, Dr. Funder, you mentioned with the rise of the internet, we have so many opportunities and so much information at the tips of our fingers. But like realistically, for you guys who've actually done this research, how difficult is it logistically to set that up and to run it? And how are you able to get funding, or do you guys face a lot of issues with that?
I've been pretty lucky with funding. We did a smaller project that only had 24 countries in it some years ago, and it was done on the internet. So, and I had some money left over from a grant for a different subject. So that's what got us started. We had to hire a programmer to write custom internet code, especially when you start doing things in different languages. You can't just use standard stuff. You need a real programmer, which was a challenge. But then I applied for a real grant from the National Science Foundation. And this was one of the things that just still touches me. I approached our 24 collaborators from the first project, and I said, would you guys write me a letter of support addressed to NSF saying that you would participate in the project? You think it's a good idea that I do it? And out of 24 that I asked, guess how many replied with a letter? 24. They're just, and I think NSF was kind of blown away by that. They get 24 letters from all over the world. And so they did fund us. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was enough for us to hire professional programmers to have a drop and drag website. It was actually kind of complicated, that works in 40 languages, including the ones that read from left to right, from right to left rather, the Arabic and Hebrew, and Marathi. We had Marathi and things that don't use the conventional characters that we're used to. Of course, two varieties, actually 3 varieties of Chinese. And so we needed money to do that. So we got some funding. To get a lot of funding, that's always hard, but it would be really hard in this area. But the National Science Foundation did support us. So, And we actually got a little bit of money from other places. The South African government provided a little bit of money for us. The Czech government, not Czechoslovakia, but the Czech government supported it. The Estonian government, of all things, gave us a little bit of money to help out in that thing. So, you know, you can do things. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it is possible.
My research studies have been relatively smaller and also based on more kind of survey studies, so that it didn't really require a lot of funding to conduct those research studies. So yes, a lot of them were more like collecting data through like internet or email, and like through like online surveys. So those were you know, relatively in terms of like the funding needed, we didn't really need that much funding to conduct those studies. So the characteristics of our my research studies were not really based on large funding programs.
Yeah, and sorry, I my internet was not stable, and I think I disappeared for a little bit. But so I briefly heard David said something about NSF funding international collaboration. So I'm really glad to hear that because my experience with NSF was not as straightforward, and they've you know, actually you know, had a lot of worries about having funds going to countries other than the United States. So I had previously proposed a study. We initially wanted to have a study basically with data coming from 3 countries in the world, and at the end, NSF would only fund the US portion of the entire project, and we'll have to, you know, actually ask our collaborators to, you know, try to make their ends meet and to, you know, get their own, you know, funding to conduct their portion of the project in their own country. So, so I think, you know, what I would add is that in terms of funding, I myself find it to be easiest if the collaborators are also willing to, you know, look for funding that's available to them. And I guess, you know, it's harder when you're maybe working with collaborators from countries that are, you know, really the typical non-weird countries where maybe there's actually not a psychology department or not even, you know, a funding agency at the federal or even at the, you know, school level to support research. That could be more challenging. But I guess for myself, I've been lucky to, you know, usually be able to find collaborators who are willing to actually, you know, spend a lot of time and effort to get a funding and to support the collaborative work together. So, so yeah, I would say funding's not always easy, and when it comes to having money and transactions that might involve multiple countries, that's another added hassle that we'll have to kind of navigate.
I actually
Transferring money is sorry, Paris. I'm realizing that there's a sense in which I think I missed the underlying point of your question in a way, because what all 3 of us have done is survey research. Well, Celia has done more in-depth in-person work in the different sites, but Professor Kim and I are really doing, I think, surveys. And you know, surveys are what you do in psychology when you can't do something else. They're the quickest. You know, those of you who took Psych 150 from me, remember it's S data, right? The big advantage of S data is it's very informative and easy to get. The big disadvantage is it's so easy to get that we sometimes forget there's other kinds of data that we'd really rather get. And that's where the challenge comes in. You know, 2 things. One is, and I think this goes to a deeper aspect of Paris's question, which is, you know, why sometimes people say, well, you know what, you've got This makes me crazy, by the way, but I get reviewers saying, yeah, sure, you've got data from 64 countries, but they're all college students. And I say, like, look at any issue of JPSP, it's all college students, but they're all from Connecticut. Is that not a problem for you? I've got 64 countries of college students. How is that not better? But somehow I'll get grief for that. But getting, where was I going with that? Oh, what you'd really like to have is at least two things. You'd like to have a representative sample, right? I've got data from Japan, for example. Do I have nationally representative data from Japan? No. Do I have data from 2 cities in Japan? Yeah, well, that's nice. But really, I'd like to have like what Gallup has, right? A nationally representative sample. Or I'd like to go to Japan and actually, you know, as we call it, run subjects, right? Bring them into the lab and do things interactive with them. That's more than just having them sit at a computer screen. That's expensive. And that's so prohibitively expensive that I think most of us don't even aspire to it. But the deeper point of the funding thing is what you really need to do this stuff the way we'd really like to do it would be so expensive that I can't see anybody funding it. But that's, in my fantasy world, we'd be going firsthand to all of our sites, not just sending them email links or internet links, and we would be having nationally representative samples in each of these countries, both of which can, in theory, be done, but they take money, and more than anybody's willing to give anybody, I think, at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Funder. You actually predicted my follow-up question, so thank you. Kind of another joint question is, so I know you guys, Dr. Chung and Dr. Funder, you guys kind of had 2 different experiences with getting funding, it sounded like, from, I believe it was the NSF, kind of, you know, getting this overwhelming support, you know, with all of your letters versus kind of their hemming and hawing and not quite wanting to move the ball forward. Do you find that, you know, in terms of funders and also maybe fellow researchers and, you know, whatever organizations you're affiliated with, do you feel like you get discouraged to pursue cross-cultural and non-weird research? Do you feel like there is a sort of stigma preventing you guys from pursuing that research?
I'll say yes. And I already alluded to it. So you already heard me vent a little of my pet peeves. We just submitted an article that I really like a lot on basically economic variation at both the individual and cultural level, at the individual and national level, and finding how those affect situational experience. And that's not super important what it was about, except it's a paper I like a lot. We're having a terrible time getting it published because we sent it to a journal a new journal that specifically has its mission as encouraging non-weird research. So we've got data from 64 countries, and we've got data, our co-authors include people from all of those countries. So it's this huge long co-author list of everybody helped us gather the data. They rejected it on the grounds that we don't have nationally representative samples from each of these countries. And that's where I just kind of went, who has nationally representative samples? You know, in fact, in a way you could say that's a strength, right? That if I find the difference between American students and Czech students and South African students and Jordanian students and so forth, you could try to explain it away by education, age, or economic status, but really those things are pretty much held constant. It's certainly not so much economic status as much as education and age, but that makes cross-cultural comparisons, I think, actually more informative in a way than if you had countries that vary, you know, from each other in all kinds of other ways. So the fact that I think kind of silly criticism comes up again and again, I think is a stigmatization that if I was doing the very same study in just one country, if I just limited that very same study to the US or to different states in the US, I don't think I'd run into the same kind of resistance I run into trying to do it around the world, which seems very ironic to me. I don't know if Celia, Professor Chung and Professor Kim, if you've had similar kinds of issues of people complaining about your samples.
Yeah, that certainly comes up in the articles that I submit to different journals, and always having one or two reviewers on, the feedback that, would be unhappy about the way you collected your data, how equivalent the measures are, or, how well you translated your materials, and, all kinds of things that, by the time you get to a point with like 64, responses from 64 countries, some of these things are actually probably not as crucial, but then nonetheless, perhaps it's a, sort of a bias, or, way people are judging international research. That always seems to be, some comments that I receive whenever I submit, cross-cultural comparative research to journals. And I would say the other barrier or the other challenge about conducting international cross-cultural research is that it takes a lot of time. So, if you only have individuals from a single country, then, all the instruments are pretty much, you only have to have it in one language. And, the worry about how representative your sample is appears to be a lot, less prominent. As compared to if you have more than one country, then people will start to comment on, is it representative, is it not? And but then interestingly, I think, what David, said just now reminded me of, some efforts that are really huge, and, data collection that happen in so many different countries, and producing these so-called nationally representative data sets. There are actually quite a number of them available currently. Some of them include the World Value Survey. That's one. I think they've conducted it 7 different times across many different years now. And then there's also this huge data set called the Program for International Student Assessment, the PISA data set. That's also, the researchers try to be as nationally representative as possible in their sampling strategies. So, what I just wanted to say is that, there are resources available online, but then, some of these existing data sets probably aren't going to directly address the question that, for example, a researcher like me, wanted to address. And so, they already have, their own research questions that they set out to answer. So, but those data sets exist, but then they're, number one, not very much utilized, and number two, they're not, sometimes not especially helpful for someone who has their own research ideas and not necessarily aligning with the questions and goals of those data sets. So.
I'll jump back in there. You saw me in the chat get excited about measurement and variance. That's the other thing I get. I don't know if Professor Kim and Chung, you run into that as well. That as soon as you start translating a measure into another language, people want to know, well, does it have exactly the same measurement properties it does in English? Well, I don't know, so I'm going to do it anyway. The fact that I don't know doesn't stop me from gathering data. I'll just go do it. And the thing about measurement and variance bugs me more and more all the time, because it's the only area of research, it's a little niche area of cross-cultural psychology where people just obsess about this technical term, where in the rest of psychology, we're taught to be very skeptical about rejecting the null hypothesis, right? Except in the study of measurement and variance, where we immediately accept it, we immediately reject the null hypothesis. We say, no, everybody's different until proven the same. Like, I thought we were supposed to assume people are the same until proven different, but no, we're rejecting the null hypothesis straight off. And the more I get into what measurement and variance is all about, the less impressed I am by it as a concern. So again, don't get me started. I could go on and on about that, but the measurement and variance is basically does the measure mean the same thing around the world? And I'm sure the answer to that is no. But we're not going to find out anything about it unless we try it. And I'm not sure that if I take the same measure that you take, for example, that we're going to interpret it the same way either. So somehow, if we're in different countries, that's a big issue. For the same country, it's not. And I don't understand that one either. So again, the question went to stigmatizing. I wouldn't quite call it stigmatizing, but I would call it what do you call it, a lead weight tied around one leg or something as you do it, that as you're trying to do something that's already difficult enough, you have people holding you to standards that aren't held for research that's done in single countries. Prove your measurement and variance and show you have a nationally representative sample. People who don't do cross-cultural psychology are never challenged on either of those points. So yeah, it's hard.
I wanted to share one example that when I was doing a study, doing a comparison study between Korea and US, there were these gratitude items measuring gratitude. So the items included like appreciative, grateful, and thankful, but we didn't really have, in Korea, those terms, like the separate terms to for those three different terms. So our colleagues in South Korea, they kind of came up with the items that better reflect the terms used for gratitude in that culture, but the reviewers got stuck on those items and saying, because these items are different, that we can't really compare these. And that was just really not understanding the cultural differences and how the language is really related to the culture and things like that. So it gave us really difficult time to explain that was a necessary revision of the scale, but so that was a hard time for us to really justify what we had to do and explain it to the reviewers.
So it sounds like you guys are getting a lot of difficulty and kind of subtle pushback in conducting this non-weird research, which actually ties into another question I wanted to pose to you guys, or just kind of a general topic to expand on. When I first proposed this idea and I was looking for researchers who have done non-weird research, it was very, very difficult to find specifically, researchers at UCR who have done that. And I was curious about, do you guys feel like, a lot of researchers have been discouraged from pursuing, non-weird research due to these pushbacks? And can you feel kind of the effects of that discrepancy in weird versus non-weird research when you're working with other people or when you're publishing or collaborating, and just kind of your general thoughts on these discrepancies?
I'll just say briefly that I think a lot of researchers figure that doing things with UCR undergraduates is complicated enough. And so they just don't venture out, and you can have a whole career and never do that. So there's not a lot pushing you out of that comfort zone. If you're doing research with American undergraduates, you're never going to be challenged on your sample. You're never going to be challenged on measurement variance. Everybody will just take it for granted that what you're doing is reasonable. As soon as you start doing cross-cultural stuff, not only do you have logistical difficulties, but also being held to these other standards. And I think a lot of researchers just figure it's not worth the effort. And in terms of their own careers, or in terms of what they're going to learn extra from all of the extra effort. That's my take on it.
Kind of similar in terms of when thinking about publishing my work, I always have to think about where to publish my international work, especially if it's not a comparison study, but just, with the, for example, South Korean sample. I got a comment from a reviewer that the reviewer wasn't sure if the study's findings are really beneficial to the readers of the journal, because the focus is not on international work. So thinking about that, then I kind of had to try to look at the previous articles, the previous papers published in that journal, and if there are actually some international work published in that journal, to really find the one that would appreciate international study and research. So that's another thing, that the pool of the publication outlets, it can be limited for international work.
Yeah, I would, agree with what's been said about the challenges in conducting, international research, and therefore, it's just, probably easier, if someone's, focused on, just publishing really quickly, perhaps cross-cultural work or international work is kind of like, lower on the priority list. But then I would say, realistically, it's quite hard to find collaborators, even though, nowadays, with successes like David's, with like international collaborations like through the internet, and those are really encouraging. But still, for example, in my own work as a developmental psychologist, trying to find someone who's willing to recruit children or adolescent sample in a different country, let's say in Japan, that's extremely challenging, not only because of funding issue, but also about a lot of these cultural considerations. Some researchers are not willing to go into schools to recruit participants, minors, and so on. So it's just kind of like an added layer, depending on the types of questions, the kinds of sample that you want to include in your study. It's just, if, going back to my original point, which is, if someone's aiming for something quick and, turnaround is fast, and international work is probably not really, helping in that sense. So.
Okay, so we're starting to get low on time. So I wanted to kind of follow up with a bit of a combination of two questions that I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on. Just what are some advice or words you can give to students interested in doing non-weird research? And do you have anything you'd like to share about why you think that it's important for people to get interested and to get involved in non-weird research? And this is the perfect opportunity to plug your labs if any of you are interested in doing that.
Well, okay, as maybe the most extroverted of the three of us, I'll go first. And it's a joy. It's been just one of the more pleasant, certainly professional experiences of my life has been dealing with all of these people around the world, and seeing the commonality of interests and seeing how that transcends borders and linguistic barriers and everything else, that we really were, all psychologists together. So it's definitely been worth it. In terms of why it's important beyond just it being fun, well, of course, there's the classic worry about weird research is, does what we're finding with a subset of humanity apply to humanity at large? And even if the answer turns out to be yes, and I actually think the answer is going to turn out to be yes for most things, we need to know, we're data driven. We're scientists. We can't just assume it. We need to find it out. And, the other reason is diversity. And one of the many reasons why diversity is important is not just, ethnic diversity and all those kinds of diversities, but diversity of ideas. And as Professor Chung and Professor Kim have both noted, people around the world think differently. Well, that broadens our possible pool of ideas, right? That we're going to be more creative as a group if we get points of view that aren't the ones we're used to or socialized into accepting as a matter of course. So yeah, I think it's really important both for understanding what people are like, but around the world, but also for getting ideas from around the world that might be ones that had never occurred to us just operating from a narrow cultural perspective.
Kind of similar to that, I think that by doing international work and collaborating with international scholars like colleagues, I think that really learning from them and what I thought was true might not be always true, depending on the person, community, or society or culture. So always taking that not knowing all sense really helped me broaden my perspectives too. And our society is getting more diverse. So, and I think that learning more about diverse cultures and different values and perspectives that will help us and that will benefit us in the long term as well. For students who are interested in doing the international work on non-weird research, my suggestion would be try to identify faculty members and professors who do the research. And, if you're interested in getting some more research experience, and talk to, various opportunities in the lab, or like review some of their work and see if, the interests align well with yours. And there are some different like research aspects, different processes like communicating with different collaborators and collecting data from different cultures. And there are many aspects like that. And I think that depending on where they are, the lab research products, where they are at, there can be diverse experiences you may be exposed to. So talk to different faculty members and learn more about their work. I would suggest that.
I know we're low on time, so I'll just quickly add that, once again, I think cross-cultural work is fun. So, as you get into this type of work, you find, there are just like so many things that you'd be inspired to do, like, things that you might not be thinking about, even like worth asking, could be, because of a cross-cultural exposure, you might be able to, see the value of asking certain questions. And I would give an example, probably a lot of you are familiar with like, demographic questions, whenever you fill out a survey, you fill out things about income, gender and so on. But then, I recently learned that, in Japan, it's actually not quite great to ask people about their income. So, we'll have to think about different ways of asking or getting a sense of, or a proxy of someone's income. And so, it's just kind of like, by conducting research in different countries, you get to kind of think about, well, what you think is, a very simple question might not be as straightforward, or maybe there are actually creative ways of asking these questions or refining your measure. So I find it very, very fun to be conducting research in different countries, and I'm learning a lot from my collaborators. And so as for advice for students interested in cross-cultural work, international work, I would say go to conferences and don't be shy, talk to people, go to, poster sessions, and, talk to people who are maybe not from the United States, and find out about what they're working on, and to even just like, make new friends. I think that's important. And I've, as an undergrad, I've been to, some conferences where I met, people who are just like, doing things that are completely not in my field. But then I talk to them and, find out opportunities, and sometimes they would connect me with other people who are in my field actually. So yeah, I would suggest going to conferences on top of what Dr. Kim suggested, which is talking to faculty and researchers and so on. So.
And to follow up on that, and with what our president Jenna just put in the chat, excuse me, we at PsyChi host RPsych, which is a wonderful research conference. So if you guys are interested in a good free conference, please check out RPsych. We work very hard on it. I know we are out of time, so if any of you guys need to head out, please feel free. But I did have one more question in the chat from someone who is actually working on some non-weird research right now, who wanted to hear your thoughts. So Nancy asked, as a student doing non-weird research regarding Latinx undergrad students in the US, what might be some hindrances since I'm focusing on a specific minority? I am also trying to establish sub-ethnic groups, since Latinx are often referred to altogether as a monolithic group in most weird research. What might you guys recommend?
I think I can respond to that briefly, and just to say I feel your pain. It's really, categorization is really difficult, and that was one of the first things we learned in our project. We had a little thing we were going to decide, well, we want to ask some demographic questions, and so we put in, what is your ethnicity? And we used, so naively, we started out with this categories the US Census uses. Those categories make no sense at all as soon as you cross the borders of the United States. Hispanic means nothing in Europe. They have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm sorry, are you going to really ask a Japanese and a Chinese and a Vietnamese if they're Asian? I mean, give me a break. So what we ended up doing was, well, first of all, we still said, what's your ethnicity? We just gave up on having a drop-down menu. We did try for a while to do that. It's just impossible. And so we just left it blank. And that's going to be actually my next project, is to try to deconstruct what people are writing in that blank. We even found that when our translators or collaborators were translating the word ethnicity, a lot of them came back to us and said, what do you mean ethnicity? How do I translate into my language? And I realized, I'm not sure I know what I mean by ethnicity. You know, we take it so, the categories are so reified in the US, we think of them as real things. Like the questioner said, Latinx, we're like, okay, cool, done. And then we realize it's way more complicated than that. And you really see that when you start crossing national boundaries and realizing it's just, you know, there are nuances within nuances within nuances of people's identities. A lot of our ethnicity questions, I was just looking at it the other day, got translated as nationality. You know, so if you ask a Croatian, what's your ethnicity, what they want to know is whether you're Serbian or not, because Serbian is bad for most Croatians. And, you know, like, it's just issues come up around the world that we don't even know about, and the nuances in that. So my advice about doing that would be to try to start off as unstructured as possible, let people define for themselves what it is, and maybe you can develop a categorization system out of that rather than pre-impose one, you know, from the top down. And I'd also say good luck, because it's going to be hard.
Thanks, David, for the advice. I think it's really helpful, because whenever I do the studies and looking at the categorizations, I feel like it's very limited in terms of interpreting the findings for those groups. And I've seen some studies saying that there's actually a greater variability within each racial group compared to, you know, the variability across different racial groups. So one identity factor can't really define individuals' experiences. So I would suggest that if you're interested in the, you said, sorry, I'm looking at, so you're interested in doing the Latinx undergraduate student research, what I would suggest is think about other relevant factors, other different demographic variables or identities, and thinking about how to use the understand the intersectionality of these different identities can influence their experiences and perspectives. So not just focusing on that one like race factor or ethnicity factor, the one identity factor, but really think about different identities and how the intersectionality, how they play with each other. That would be my suggestion for you.
Yeah, not to complicate this, but I would say, you know, the usual demographic surveys that we use, they're very much not ideal. And, you know, there are actually, if you're interested, I think, you know, it could be a study alone to create a good demographic survey that could be applied to, you know, various different settings and countries and for different age groups. And I think, you know, one conversation that was very interesting that I had with another developmental psychologist recently is that, you know, one's own self-report of one's, you know, ethnic racial identity could be different from, let's say, a family member's report of, you know, the family's race or ethnicity. And so that actually could even complicate things if you're interested in studying, you know, families as a, you know, unit, which, you know, developmental psychologists, we do that very often. And so that's also an area I think, you know, we need to devote more time to try and understand what it means if there's like a discrepancy in your own, you know, self-reported ethnicity versus someone else in your family is reporting on the same questionnaire, but then holding a different opinion. You know, I know this is probably not something that you're interested in, but just to, you know, let you know kind of like the complexity that's involved in these types of, you know, questions.
Okay, and I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up here. I know we have to get our social going. Thank you to everyone who came to our panel. Thank you guys for speaking. Everything you talked about was very interesting and I think very informative. I know I'm super excited about it. So thank you guys so much for coming again.
Thank you. Got a great group.
Thank you again to all of our panelists. We really enjoyed having you here. And thank you for everyone that stuck around until the end of the panel. We really appreciate you all for also spending your time and sticking around for that last question. For those that are staying, we do have our next social happening soon, but otherwise we will see you at our next general meeting for elections. So we expect some of y'all to be submitting that officer application soon, which again is due on Friday. So we will get started in just a bit and stop the recording.